My son
stood
handed
up
me
at
a glass of water
restaurant
at the
and called
Christmas
me a
dinner
loser
table.
to my face.
An hour later,
His
I was
mother,
standing
my
in his
ex-wife,
kitchen,
said
my
nothing.
hands shaking as
Her
I
new
dialed
husband just
911.
smirked. I didn't
What
say
I
a
found
word
wasn't
either.
just a family
I
secret.
just went home.
It was a
And by the following
$1.5
Monday,
million
I had started the
murder
process
plot.
of taking back
And I was the
everything I ever
target.
gave my son.
Before I tell you
The
how
car
this
he drove, the
perfect holiday
penthouse he
dinner
lived
turned
in,
into a
and the
crime
company
scene,
he thought he
please
built.
let me know in the comments
He was about
where
to
you're
learn that a
watching
loser
from.
like me built
And be
his
sure to like
entire
this
world,
video and
and a
subscribe
loser
to
like
the
me
channel
could tear it all
because
down.
you won't believe the trap
My name
I
is
set for
Elias
them in the
Harrington,
end.
and at
The lie
72
began
years
at the
old,
dinner
I've
table.
learned that silence
It always
has many
does.
shades.
The
There's
centerpiece
silence
was a mountain of
peace,
pine
the
boughs
silence
and
of
glittering
understanding,
ornaments so
and the
tall you
most
could barely
dangerous
see the
silence
person
of
across
all,
from you.
the one you
In
use
this
to muffle
case,
the roar
that person
inside.
was my son Ethan.
That night at a
The
restaurant
table
called
was
the
laden
Golden
with a
Spoon,
feast that could
I
have
was
fed a
using the
small
third kind.
army. A
This place
perfectly
was Victor
brown
Manning's
turkey
territory.
glistening under the light
He was
of a
my
crystal
ex-wife
chandelier.
Claire's new husband.
Everything was perfect.
Everything about it
Too
was
perfect.
polished and tastelessly
My daughter-in-law
expensive.
Sophia
From the
raised
crystal
her glass of
chandeliers
wine.
that hung like glass
The diamond on her
jellyfish,
finger
to
caught
the
the
clinking
light
of
and
silver
shattered it
against
into
porcelain.
a
dozen tiny rainbows.
Victor chose it, of course.
A toast, she said,
It was
her
a
voice
stage,
smooth and
and
silk.
tonight it seemed I
To
was the
family,
main
to
attraction.
success,
My old
and to a
suit, a
wonderful
heart-churner
Christmas.
Marks I'd owned
Ethan
for 20
smiled
years,
a wide,
was
practiced
perfectly
smile
tailored
that
and
didn't
immaculate,
quite reach
but it
his
felt
eyes.
out of place in
To
the sea of
success, he
silk and
echoed,
cashmere.
Looking at
It
me,
was a suit of
it's
quality,
been a great year for the
not
firm.
a flash.
We just landed the Thompson
And in my
account.
son Marcus's world,
I
there was
nodded,
no
taking
room
a
for
small sip
anything
of
that
water.
didn't flash. I
Thompson
could feel his
account.
eyes on me and
It
those
sounded
of his
impressive,
wife, Sophia.
but I had spent
They weren't
40
looking at
years
me.
as a forensic
They were
accountant,
assessing
a
me.
bloodhound for
Every
numbers
time I
that
took a
didn't
sip of
add up.
water, I saw Sophia's
My
brow
entire life
furrow
was about
slightly,
finding the
as if the
lie
way
hidden
I
in the
held my
ledger.
glass was further
And my
proof
son's
of my
life was a
failure.
ledger full of red
Marcus
ink.
was busier.
I knew for a fact
He was
that his
performing.
firm was just him and a
He
laptop
leaned back
and a
in his
rented
velvet
office space.
upholstered chair, one
6
arm
months
draped
ago,
casually
he
over
had
the
come
back.
to me, his face
The
a
other
mask of
swirling a
shame,
glass of
asking
red
for a
wine.
$40,000
It was a gesture he'd copied
dollar
from
loan.
Victor. The
A
company is
short-term
exploding.
bridge, he'd called it an
Victor
investment
Marcus announced
opportunity
his
he
voice
couldn't
loud
pass
enough
up.
for the next table to
I gave it
glance
to him,
over.
of course.
We just closed our
always
second
do.
round of funding.
You tell
Investors
yourself
are
it's the
lining up.
last time that
Sophia's
this will
right.
be the one that
It's probably
turns it
time
all
I
around.
upgrade the 5 series
But
to
as
a
I sat
7
there
series.
listening to them talk about
Sophia
their
let out a
upcoming
little
ski trip
glassy
to
veil
laugh.
and the new Mercedes.
You
in the
deserve it,
driveway.
honey. You've
I
worked
did the
so
math
hard.
in my head.
The
I remained
40,000 was
silent.
gone.
I knew all
I
about
knew
that
that.
second round of funding.
But this
I knew
display,
exactly
this was
where
something
every single
else.
dollar came from.
The watch on
and it
Ethan's
certainly
wrist was
wasn't from the line of
easily
investors
$8,000.
Marcus was imagining.
Sophia's
dress was from a designer
Clara, my
whose
ex-wife,
name I
sat
only
there
knew
with
because
a
my
tight
late
smile,
wife used to
plastered
dream
on
of
her
owning
face.
one.
She
Their
had changed.
performance of wealth was costing
5
a
years
fortune.
with
Victor had worn
That's
away
when
the
I felt
practical woman I once
A
knew,
dull ache in
replacing
my
her with
chest,
a
a
pale
gentle
imitation
squeeze around
who
my
worried
heart.
if her handbag
I
was
put my
last
fork
season.
down.
She
A
looked
wave
at
of
Victor with
dizziness
an
washed
adoring
over me,
gaze,
making the
as if he had
chandelier lights
personally
blur into a
invented
single
success.
blinding star.
Our son
I
is
took another
brilliant,
sip of
isn't he,
water,
hoping
Elias?
to clear my head.
She asked, turning
Stress,
to me.
I told myself.
But it wasn't a question.
The holidays are
It was
always
a statement,
stressful.
a
The
silent
rich food, the
comparison.
emotional strain of
Our
seeing
son
my
is
son
brilliant,
live a life
unlike
built
you.
on a foundation of sand.
I just gave a slight
just
nod and
indigestion,
brought a
but
piece
the
of
pressure
steak
in
to
my
my
chest
mouth.
grew tighter. It was cooked
It
perfectly.
felt like a band
but I
slowly
tasted
being
nothing.
constricted.
All my senses were focused
Dad,
on
are
the
you
play
okay?
unfolding before me.
Ethan asked.
Victor, having
The
let
concern in
Marcus
his
have his
voice
monologue,
sounded almost
finally
genuine.
spoke in his deep,
I'm fine.
patronizing tone.
I managed to say, forcing
Ambition
a
is
smile.
everything, Marcus.
Just a little tired.
Your father, Elias,
Sophia,
is a
the
good
meal is
man, a
spectacular.
fine engineer,
Truly,
but he lacks
she
that
beamed.
spark.
Oh, it's nothing,
He
Samuel.
builds things for
We're
other
just so
people,
happy you
never
could
an
be here.
empire for himself.
The
In
room
this
felt
world, if you're
warm,
not
too
building,
warm.
you're being
The
buried.
scent of pine and
It
roasting
was an
meat
insult
suddenly
wrapped in a
suffocating.
backhanded compliment,
I needed
a
to get
technique
up to
men
move.
like Victor perfected.
If you'll excuse me,
Marcus nodded
I said,
eagerly like a
placing my
devout
napkin on the
follower hearing
table.
a sermon.
I think I just need a glass of fresh water.
I've tried to explain
I
that to
stood up
Dad
my
so
legs,
many
feeling
times, the
unsteady.
importance of taking
As
risks
I
of
walked
building a
towards the
personal
kitchen,
brand,
I could feel
but he
their
just
eyes
talks
on my
about
back.
savings and safe
The walk down the
investments.
short hallway
It's so
felt
dated.
like a mile.
Dated was the word he
The
used.
polished hardwood
Last time it was
floor seemed to
cautious.
sway beneath my
The time
feet.
before that traditional.
I gripped the
The
door
words
frame
changed,
of the kitchen
but
to
the
steady
contempt
myself.
never did.
The room was
The
a
dinner
marvel
continued a
of
steady
modern
stream of
design,
boasts.
all stainless
Marcus
steel
talked
and
about their
gleaming
penthouse
white
apartment apartment with
countertops.
its city views,
It
their
looked like it
upcoming
had been
vacation to
lifted from a
Fiji, the
magazine.
new watch Sophia had bought
But just
him.
like their lives,
Every
the
story
perfection was
stone
only on
thrown
the
into my
surface.
silence.
A pile of mail
I
was
was the
shoved
wall they were
carelessly
bouncing
into
their
a corner of
achievements
the
off of
counter.
just to hear the
A
sound
messy
they
stack
made.
of envelopes threatening
Finally,
to spill
as
onto the
dessert
floor.
was served, a 7-layer
I reached for a
chocolate
glass
cake
from
that
the
likely
cabinet,
cost
and my
more than
sleeve
monthly
brushed against
utility
the
bill.
pile. It was all the
Victor
force
signaled the
needed to
waiter.
upset the fragile
The check,
balance.
please.
Letters and
my
bills
account.
cascaded across the
He
granite,
said it
scattering
casually,
like
but
fallen
his eyes
leaves.
flickered toward me.
Damn it!
Another
I muttered,
performance
bending
of
down
power.
to pick them up.
That was the breaking
Bills
point.
from high-end
Marcus,
department
maybe
stores,
from the
a
wine,
letter from a
or
luxury
maybe just
car
high on his own
dealership,
arrogance,
and then
suddenly
one
stood up.
envelope that made me
His chair
freeze.
scraped harshly against
It was from the
floor.
Secure Life
A few
Insurance
diners
Company.
at nearby tables.
My
turned
name
to
and
look.
address were clearly
See,
visible
Marcus
through the
said his
plastic
voice
window.
ringing out
I hadn't
in the
done business
opulent
with
room.
them in over a
He
decade.
gestured from Victor
My
to
heart,
me.
which was already beating
That's the difference.
uncomfortably, began to hammer
Dad,
against
you're a
my
loser.
ribs. I picked
You've
up the
spent your
envelope.
whole life in that
had
dusty
been
old
opened.
house on those dirty
My training,
construction
my
sites.
instincts.
Then he
Every
turned
alarm
to
bell
Victor,
honed
his
over a
voice
lifetime
full of
of
admiration.
uncovering deceit screamed at me.
Victor is not.
This wasn't my mail.
He's a winner.
It had been sent to my address,
air went
but
thick.
Ethan must have picked
Sophia
it up.
nodded smugly as
Why
if
I
her
knew I
husband
shouldn't.
had just spoken
I
a
knew
great
it
truth.
was a violation of
Clara
privacy.
stared down at her plate,
But a deeper
her silence
instinct,
a final
the instinct
act
of a
betrayal.
father who senses a
Even the
profound
people at the
danger
next
took
table
over.
quickly looked
My
away,
fingers
their
trembling,
feigned
slightly
ignorance,
pulled
a
out the
testament to
document
my
inside.
public humiliation.
It wasn't a letter. It was a policy.
I looked directly
confirmation.
into Marcus's
The words
eyes.
swam before my
For a
eyes.
split second,
stark
I
and
saw a
brutal in
flicker
the
of the
cold
little
kitchen
boy
light.
I taught to ride a bike.
A
Type
hint
of
of
policy
regret,
term life
but it was
insurance
buried
insured
too
Samuel
deep beneath
Thompson.
layers of designer
Policy value
clothes and
1.5
entitlement.
million.
I said
Policy
nothing.
start date 3 weeks ago.
The rage I expected to feel
and then
never
the
came.
final devastating line.
In its place was a
Beneficiary
cold, sharp
Ethan
clarity,
Thompson.
a terrifying
Son.
certainty.
It was
The air
over.
left my lungs.
The final
The
thread
pressure in
had
my
snapped.
chest intensified.
Slowly,
into a sharp
I placed
stabbing
my white
pain.
linen napkin on the table
$1.5
beside
million
my untouched cake.
He had taken
I
out a
stood up.
$1.5 million
My chair made no
life
noise.
insurance policy.
My
on me.
movements were deliberate, measured.
I sank
I
against
glanced
the
at
counter,
Clara,
the
at
smooth,
Victor,
cold
and
stone,
finally at
doing
Marcus.
nothing to cool
Then
the
without a
fire of
word, I
betrayal
turned
that
and
coursed
walked out of
through
the
me.
restaurant. My
The
mind
heavy wooden
raced
door
trying to
closed
make
behind
sense
me,
of the
cutting off the
impossible,
sound,
the
leaving
loan,
them
the
to
lies
their
about
hollow
his
victory.
success, the
I
extravagant
didn't have to
spending.
say anything.
It was all a
My
desperate
actions were
charade.
about to speak for
He
me.
wasn't just in debt.
The
he
air
was
outside was
drowning in
cold,
it.
but it cleared my
The
head.
wave of dizziness
I didn't hail a
returned
cab.
stronger this time,
I
and
walked.
a cold sweat broke
The
out
wealthy
on my
Chicago
forehead.
neighborhood slowly
felt
gave
sick,
way to the
truly
quieter, more
sick.
familiar streets.
My
of
eyes
own.
scanned the countertop,
My house
searching
stood
for
under the
something,
shadow of
anything
an old
to
oak
ground
tree,
me.
a solid
And then
two-story
I
brick
saw it.
home I designed and helped
Next to the
build
sink
myself
was the
30 years
half-empty
ago.
bottle of premium
It wasn't
Springs
flashy.
water I had been
It was
drinking
durable
from
like
when I
me.
first arrived.
Inside everything was
Ethan
in
had
order.
handed it to me himself.
The smell of old mahogany.
Here you
and
go,
the paper
Dad.
from the books lining my
Hydrate, he
shelves
said with a
filled
smile.
the air. This
And
was
right
my
beside it,
sanctuary,
partially
a world
hidden
away
behind
from
a
the
marble
phoniness I
salt
had just
cellar,
left behind.
was a small,
I didn't
clear
turn on the
vial.
television.
It
I
was
didn't
no
pour
bigger
myself
than
a
my
drink.
thumb with no label.
Anger
It was
clouds
almost empty,
judgment.
but I could see
And
a
tonight
single
I needed
viscous
to be
drop of
colder
clear
than
liquid
ice.
clinging to the
I
bottom.
went into my study.
In one horrifying
It was a small
crystalline
room,
moment,
but everything in it
everything
had a
connected.
purpose.
The sudden
On the walls
illness,
were
the
blueprints
tightness
of
in my
bridges
chest,
and
the
buildings I
$1
had helped create.
$5
Real
million
things,
insurance
things
policy,
that last.
the unlabeled vial,
On a
the
corner
glass
of the
water
desk,
from
there
my
was a
son's
silver-framed
hand.
photograph.
This wasn't
Marcus, aged
indigestion.
5, wearing
This
an
wasn't
oversized
stress.
plastic
This was
construction
an
helmet,
audit of my
grinning
own
on my
murder.
shoulders at a job
For a
site.
moment, pure,
His eyes
unadulterated
then were full
panic
of pure
seized me.
pride and
I wanted
love.
to scream, to run
Where
out of
did
the
I
kitchen
lose
and
that
confront
boy?
them, to smash the facade of
The
their
question
perfect
hit me not
Christmas
as a
to
sharp
pieces.
pain,
But
as a
then,
dull, weary
lifetime
ache
of
that had
discipline
been
took
building
over.
for years.
I had faced down
I had been too
embezzlers who
quiet.
had stolen
I had
millions,
hoped my
and artists who had
unconditional
ruined
love would be
entire
enough.
companies. I had
was
learned
wrong.
one crucial lesson. Unconditional
Never
love
let
does
them
not
see
mean
you sweat.
unconditional sacrifice.
The moment you
show emotion, you lose.
Tonight, the
My breathing
sacrificing
steadied.
ended.
The panic
I sat
receded,
down in my
replaced by
worn
an
leather
ice-cold
chair
clarity,
and turned on my
My
old,
mind, the mind of
slightly
a
slow
forensic
but
accountant,
reliable
began to
HP
work.
desktop.
This was no
The
longer a
screen
family
glowed,
crisis.
illuminating my impassive
It was a
face.
crime scene, and I was the
I
primary
didn't browse the
witness.
web or check my
My
personal
movements
emails.
became deliberate,
My
precise.
fingers moved with
I
practiced
glanced up
ease
and saw
opening
the
an
small
encryption
dark
program
program
I'd
I'd installed years ago.
mounted in the corner
I
of the
typed in a
ceiling.
long password, a
They were
string of
watching,
letters,
or at
numbers,
least
and
they could
symbols
be.
that no one else on
I
Earth
had to
knew.
act normally.
A simple interface
I
appeared
slid
on
the
the screen
insurance
with a list
policy
of
back
folders.
into its envelope.
Their
and
names
placed it
were
on the
meaningless
counter.
unless you knew what
Then
they
my
really
hand
were.
moving with a surgeon's steadiness,
Harrington
I
Investments,
picked up the tiny
LLC,
vial.
Elmwood Estates.
My fingers closed around it, and I
MK
slipped it deep
Innovations.
into the pocket of my trousers.
Inc. Seed funding
Evidence.
agreement project.
I turned to the
Audi
refrigerator,
A8
opened the
lease
door, and
contract.
took out a new sealed
Victor
bottle
Manning
of water.
Consulting
I
Payment
twisted
Schedule.
the cap, the
Each
plastic
name was a
crackling
thread,
in the
an
silent
invisible
kitchen.
thread I had used to weave
I raised
the
the
world
bottle
my
to my
son now
lips
lived in,
and took a long
the world
drink,
he thought he
letting
had
the
created
cool liquid
himself.
soothe my
It was
raw
like
throat.
being the engineer of
I needed
a
to
bridge.
flush my
You
system.
can't see the
I
rebar
needed
hidden
to
deep inside
think.
the concrete, but
After
without
a
it,
moment,
the
I
entire
composed
structure would
myself.
collapse.
I smoothed
Tonight,
my shirt,
I was
ran
going to
a hand
begin a
through my
structural
hair,
integrity
and
test.
pasted a neutral
I
expression
opened a
on my
secure
face.
email client.
I was ready.
The recipient was already
I walked
saved.
out of the kitchen and back
Rebecca
towards
Klein,
the warm
a
golden
brilliant
light of
attorney,
the dining room.
a friend I trusted
Back to
with
the
my
life.
life.
As I
Rebecca
sat
wasn't
down,
just my
Sophia
lawyer.
looked at me with her
She was the
perfect architect of the
smile.
financial fortress I had
Feeling
quietly
better.
built.
Samuel,
She knew
I
every
looked
brick,
across the
every
table
number.
past the
The
ridiculous
email I wrote
centerpiece
was short
and met my
No
son's
pleasantries,
eyes.
no long
He
explanations.
was watching me.
She would understand.
A flicker of something
subject
unreadable in their
initiate
depths.
sunset protocol.
I forced my own smile, a grim,
Body
thin
Rebecca.
line.
We
Much
need
better.
to meet tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Your office,
I said, my voice
8:00
even
a.m.
and
Begin
calm.
the dissolution process
The
for
water
all
helped.
assets related
He
to
nodded,
MK
satisfied, and
associated
turned
parties.
back to his meal.
Priority
But
one,
I kept
the
watching
vehicle.
him, this stranger who wore
Elias.
my son's face.
Sunset
He had
protocol
no
was the
idea
name
that
we
the
had given
game
it
had
years
changed.
ago.
He thought
A
he was the
contingency
hunter
plan
closing
for
in
a
on
day
his
just
prey.
like this.
He didn't know that I
day
had
when
found
the
the
sun
trap
would
he had
set
set
on
for
an
me.
empire built on a
And I
lie.
was no longer the prey.
I hit send.
I was the
A
man
soft
who was going to
whoosh
burn
echoed
his
in the
entire
silent
world
room.
to the ground.
It was done.
The quiet of my resolve
first
was
domino
the most
was now
dangerous thing in
perched
that
at the
room.
edge of the table.
It was my own
I felt no
declaration of war.
satisfaction, no glee.
The drive home was
I just
the
felt a
longest
strange
15 minutes
quiet
of my
calm.
life.
The
Every
calm of
pair
an
of
engineer
headlights
who
in my
knows his
rearview
design
mirror
is
felt
about
like
to
an
undergo its
accusation.
final definitive
Every
test.
shadow on the side of the road
I had
felt
built
like a
Marcus's
threat.
life.
I gripped the
Now
steering
it was
wheel,
time
my
to see if
knuckles
he could
white
stand
the
on his
small
own
glass vial
once I took
a
the
cold,
scaffolding
hard
lump
way.
in my pocket. Rebecca
It was a
Klein's
tangible
office was
piece
on
of
the
nightmare,
95th floor of a
tiny
glass tower
object
that
that
held
overlooked
the
Grant
immeasurable
Park.
weight of my son's
It was the
betrayal.
kind of place that
I
smelled
didn't
of
turn on the
success,
radio.
a mixture of expensive
silence
leather
was
and
my
freshly
sanctuary.
brewed
Coffee.
A space
But
where
it
I could
never
finally let
intimidated
the
me.
pieces of the
In many
evening
ways, I
settle,
had helped
not
build
into
it.
a coherent picture,
Rebecca greeted
but into
me
not with a
jagged
handshake,
shards of
but
a
with a
shattered
familiar
reality.
weary smile.
When I
in a
finally
heavy
pulled into
ceramic
my own
mug.
driveway,
I didn't
Morning
rush
Elias,
inside.
She
I
said
sat
her
in the
voice
car
calm
for a
and
long
steady.
time,
the engine ticking.
I
as
made
it
the
cooled.
coffee the second I
My
got
house,
your email.
the one where I had
Black,
raised
no
Ethan,
sugar. The way
where
you
my
drink
wife
it
and I
when
had
you mean
shared
business.
30 years of memories.
She was
looked back
right.
at me.
For 20
It
years,
was a
Rebecca had
fortress
been
of a
more
life
than
I
I
thought
thought
I had built.
She was my
But
strategist,
the enemy
my
had not been
confidant,
outside
the keeper
the
of my
gates.
secrets.
He had been inside
She was
at
the
my
only
own table
person on earth
sharing
who
my
knew
bread.
the full extent of the
Once
financial
inside, I
fortress
locked the
built.
door and drew the deadbolt.
I took the mug, the heat warming
simple
my cold
metallic
hands.
slide
of the lock felt
Thank
like
you,
the first
Rebecca.
sane action I had taken
She gestured
in
to
hours.
one of the plush leather
I walked
chairs
through the dark,
opposite her
quiet
enormous
rooms,
oak
my
desk.
hand trailing along
She didn't
the
sit
walls.
behind it in her seat
I didn't
of
turn
power.
on the lights. She sat in the chair
I
next
didn't
to
want
mine,
to see the
making us
photographs on the
equals.
mantle. I'll
The
be
ghosts,
honest, of a
Elias,
happy family
she
that
said,
had
her
never
sharp
really
eyes
studying
studying
my
my
face.
When
In
I saw the
kitchen,
subject
placed
line
the vial
Sunset
on the
Protocol,
counter
my heart sank.
under a bright task
I
light.
always
examining
hoped it was a
like
plan
piece
we'd
of
never have to
alien
use.
technology.
I hoped
My
he'd
first
figure it
instinct,
out.
the raw
I took a
human
slow sip
instinct
of the dark
was to
bitter
pick up the
coffee.
phone and dial
It tasted like
911.
resolve. To
I looked out the
scream
window
into
at
the
the
receiver
sprawling
that
city
my
below,
son,
a city I
my
had
only
helped
child,
shape
had
with
tried to
steel
murder
and
me for
concrete.
money.
So did I.
But then the accountant in me, the man who had built a
Rebecca,
career on cold
I
hard
replied,
facts,
my voice low
took
and
over an
even.
accusation
But
without
the
sun has
irrefutable
officially
proof
set. Was just time to turn off the lights. It was my word against
Rebecca
his.
nodded
the word of an
slowly,
old
her
man,
expression
perhaps a
turning from
confused old
concern
man
against his
to the
successful,
focused,
charming
sharp
son
look
of a master chess
I
player.
needed more than a story.
Seeing the board
I
clearly.
needed a case. All right, Elias.
There was only one
walk me
person
through
I
it.
trusted to help me
I
build
know the
it.
legal structures.
I
we
pulled out my
built,
phone, my
but I
fingers
need to hear
scrolling
the
past
human
Ethan's
part.
name
What
without
was
a
the
final
final
straw.
emotion? And found the number
I
for
stared
Robert
into my
Hayes,
coffee
my lawyer
mug,
for 30 years,
seeing the reflection
and my friend
of the
for
man
40.
my son had called a
He answered
loser.
on the second ring.
He
his
said the
voice
word
thick
Rebecca
with sleep.
He said it out loud
Samuel,
in public.
He called
It's
me a
almost
loser
midnight
and called
Is everything
Victor
all
Clara's
right?
new husband a winner.
No, Robert.
And Clara
Nothing
just sat
is all
there
right,
and let
I
him.
said. My
I
own
looked up
voice
from the
sounding
mug and
distant.
met her eyes. I
He
explained
believes it.
everything starting
He
with
honestly
the dinner
believes
and
the
ending
world
with the
he
vial
lives
sitting
in
on
is
my
one
counter.
he created.
I spoke
Today
in a
we begin the
monotone, laying
process
out the
of
facts
showing him
as
the
if I were
truth of the
presenting a
foundations
financial
he's
audit.
standing on.
The $1.5
Rebecca
million
leaned forward, all
policy,
business.
the sudden chest pains.
Now
the
let's
bottle
review
of
the
water, the
assets.
vial. Let's start with
I
the
left
heart
out the
of his
core of the
so-called
betrayal
locked
empire,
away.
MK Innovations.
I just gave him the data.
I
There
let
was a
out
long
long,
silence
slow
on the
breath.
other end of the line.
Marcus
I could hear
always
the
had
faint
ambition.
sound of his wife
I
asking
began
if
my
everything
voice
was
a low
okay.
rumble. I'll give
Finally,
him that.
Robert spoke
He
his
had
voice
big
now
ideas,
wide awake
big
and
dreams.
sharp. He wanted to be the next
Samuel
Steve
listened
Jobs,
to me
the
very
next tech
carefully.
mogul
from Chicago.
Do not touch
But he
that
had no
vial
discipline,
again.
no patience.
Do not
and no
wash your
money.
hands.
He came
Put
to
it
me
in a
about
sealed
6 years
plastic
ago with a
bag.
half-baked proposal for a software
First thing in the
company.
morning, 8
It was
Hazarush
full of
AM,
buzzwords
sharp.
and projections.
I want
that
you
had
at the
no basis
emergency
in
room at
reality.
Mercy General
I
Hospital.
knew if I gave him the money
Tell them you have
directly,
chest pains
he'd burn
and
through it in a
dizziness,
year
and
and
you're
learn
worried
nothing.
you might have
I
ingested
paused,
something.
remembering the
You have a
hopeful,
heart
greedy look
condition,
in his
so they
eyes
will
that
take you
day.
seriously.
He didn't
You
want
need a
father's
full blood panel
guidance.
done.
He wanted
Insist
a
on a
bank.
toxicology screen.
So I decided
I'll
to
make
give
a
him
call
one
to a friend
just
in the
not in the way he
administration to make sure
expected.
it's handled
I
properly.
told him I couldn't
Don't
help
call
that
the
my
police,
money was
not
tied up
yet.
in safe.
Let's get our
boring
own evidence
retirement
first.
funds.
Let's build a
He was
fortress
so
they can't
disappointed he
breach.
called me old-fashioned.
His words were a lifeline.
Rebecca picked
plan.
up the narrative
a
of
series
her
of
legal mind,
logical
filling
steps
in
in
the
a world
details.
that had ceased to make
And
sense.
that's when you came to me.
Okay, Robert. We set up the silent trust
I'll do
funded
it.
with $1.5 million
Samuel,
based
he
in
said his
Nevada
voice
for
softening.
maximum anonymity.
I am so
Then we
sorry.
created a shell venture capital
hung
firm,
up the phone
Visionary
and did
Ventures
as he
Group,
said, based out
placing
of
the
New
vial
York.
in a Ziploc
We
bag
hired a
with
front
pair
man,
of
a retired
tweezers.
professor, to be the face
I
of
didn't
it.
sleep that night.
As far as Marcus
I
knows,
sat in my
he was
armchair
discovered by a
watching the
group of
hours tick by on
forward-thinking
the Grand
East Coast
Coast clock in the
investors
hall,
who saw his
each chime
genius.
marking another moment I
I
had
nodded.
survived. He was
The
so
next
proud.
morning,
I walked
he
into
flew
the
to New York,
emergency room
pitched his
of
idea,
Mercy
and
General
walked out with a
Hospital.
check.
The
He
bright
never once
fluorescent
questioned
lights
why
and
it
the
was
smell
so
of
easy.
antiseptic were a
He thought it
harsh
was his
contrast to
destiny.
the festive
He
decorations
never stopped to
of the
wonder
night
who
before.
truly owned Visionary
I followed
Ventures Group.
Robert's script perfectly,
And the
I
ownership
described my
structure of
symptoms
MK
mentioned my
Innovations,
existing
Inc.
heart condition and
reflects
expressed a
that
vague
Rebecca
concern
continued
that I
pulling
might
up
have
accidentally
accidentally taken
tablet.
the wrong medication. 60%
They
of
moved
the
me into a
shares are
bay
held
and
by
hooked me up to
Visionary
monitors
Ventures
group,
which
a
is
young
wholly
doctor
owned
came
by
in
your
his
anonymous
face,
trust
etched
with concern. 20%
He
are
listened
held by
patiently,
Marcus,
then
as
ordered the
CEO,
tests.
and the other
Blood was
20%
drawn.
are reserved for
Questions
future
were
asked.
employees.
I felt
You have
like an
complete
observer in
controlling
my own
interest,
life, a
Elias.
character in a
He
play
isn't the
whose
owner of
lines
that
had been
company.
written for him.
He is its highest
I answered
paid
everything
employee,
truthfully,
and his board
but
of
I kept the
directors
core
is
of the
for all
story
intents
folded
and
in my coat
purposes
pocket
you.
next to the small plastic
Next, we
bag
move to the
containing
symbols of
vial.
his success.
Hours later, the
car,
doctor
I said
returned
the
a
words
chart in his
tasting
hand
like
and a
ash.
perplexed look on his
The
face.
Audi A8.
Mr.
He had to
Thompson,
have it.
this is unusual.
He said it was essential
he
for
began.
projecting success to
Your
clients and
EKG is a
investors.
bit irregular,
My
but
boy,
what's
who
more
used to be
concerning
happy
is your
with a
blood work.
well-maintained Honda, was
We
now
found traces
convinced
of
the
a drug
German
called
engineering of his
amiodarone
car
in your
was
system.
a reflection of
It's
his
a
own
powerful
worth.
antiarrhythmic drug.
Another easy
Is
one.
that something you've been
Rebecca
prescribed?
said, swiping on her
No,
screen.
doctor.
He tried to get a
I said,
lease
my
in his
voice
own
steady.
name, but his
The
personal
only thing I
credit was too
take is a
thin.
loud dose beta
So he had
blocker.
the company lease it
He
for
frowned
you,
looking
or
at the
so he
report.
thinks. This is a clinical
Explain, I
dosage,
said,
a
though I knew the
significant
answer
amount
perfectly.
for a patient with
The
your
lease isn't
specific
with
heart
MK
condition who
Innovation,
isn't
she
being monitored
clarified.
for it.
It's
A
with a
dose like
separate
this
entity
could
we
be
created
extremely
for
dangerous.
Asset Management
It
Harrington
could easily
Investments,
induce a cardiac
LLC,
event that would look
We
for all
presented it
intents
to
and
Marcus as
purposes
a
like a natural
third-party
heart
fleet
attack.
management company.
There
that
it was.
MK Innovations
The
Inc.
mechanism,
would
the
contract
how.
with for
A
executive
heart
vehicles.
attack that would look natural.
He signed the paperwork.
It was
without
the
a
perfect
second
crime
thought,
tailored to my
happy to get
specific
a shiny
medical
new
history.
toy.
My son had
The
done his
contract
research.
explicitly
The
states
thought
that
sent
the
a chill
vehicle
down
is
my
provided
spine that
for
had
the
nothing
use
to
of
do
a
with the
designated
hospital air
employee
conditioning.
of MK
I had the
Innovations,
toxicology
Inc.
report printed
The
out.
moment
a
he is
crisp
no longer an
official
employee,
document that translated
the car is no
betrayal
longer his
into
to
scientific
use.
terms.
I finished.
I left the hospital
The
with
irony
the
was
report
corrosive.
folded in my coat
My holding
pocket
company, a name
next
he
to the
wouldn't
small
even
plastic
recognize,
bag was
containing
providing
the
the
vial.
chariot for my winter
I
son.
now had the
He
toxicology
was driving my
report
car
folded
paid
in
for
my
with
coat
my money,
pocket.
all while calling me
The
a
walk to my
failure.
car felt like walking
Finally,
through
we came
water.
to the biggest piece.
The sun
the
was
foundation
too
of
bright,
it all.
the world too normal.
The penthouse.
I drove
said
home
softly.
carefully, my mind already
Rebecca's
turning to the
expression
next step.
softened for a moment.
When I got home, I laid
This
all
one
three
always
pieces
felt
of
different,
evidence on
Elias.
my kitchen table.
It was.
The insurance
I
policy,
admitted this was
the
about
bag
Clara
vial,
as much as it
and the
was about
toxicology
Marcus.
report.
After she left
It was
me
a
for
holy
Victor, she
trinity
became
of malice.
obsessed with appearances.
My son's greed, his
She filled
cruelty,
Marcus's
his
head
utter
with the idea
disregard
that
for my
where you
life,
live defines
all
who
laid
you are.
bare in black and
He and
white.
Sophia searched for
There was no
months
more
for the
room
perfect
for doubt,
apartment,
no more
something that would
space
make
for a
their
father's
friends
desperate
jealous.
hope that he was somehow
They found the
mistaken.
penthouse at the Elmwood.
There was only the cold,
The
hard
Elmwood was a
truth.
beautiful pre-war
I picked up
building
the
that
phone,
had
but I didn't
recently
dial
been renovated.
911 in a
A
panic.
perfect blend
My
of
rage had
classic
cooled into
architecture
something
and
far
modern
more
luxury.
dangerous precision.
Marcus fell in love with
When
it.
the operator
He told
answered,
me
my
about it,
voice was
complaining
calm,
that it was just
measured,
out of
and
his
clear.
price range. He asked
I'd like
if
to
I could
report
help
a crime,
with the
I
security
said.
deposit. I'm reporting a case of life
I said to
insurance
Rebecca.
fraud. I told
There
him
was
it
a
was
pause on
reckless
the
to
other
live
end.
beyond his means. Sir, Rebecca smiled.
Can you explain
faintly.
what you mean?
And what you didn't
Yes,
tell him
I
was
said,
that you
looking
had
at
bought
the
the
evidence
entire
on my
building
table.
3 years
My
prior.
son recently
It was
took
an
out a
undervalued
1.5
asset in a
million
neighborhood
life
that was about
insurance
to
policy on
gentrify
me.
without my consent.
I explained the old
And I have
engineer
reason to
and me
believe,
taking
along
over.
with medical evidence,
The numbers
to
made
support it,
sense.
that he
I
has made a
purchased it
direct
through
attempt
another
on my life to
LLC, Elmwood
accelerate the
Estates
claim.
LLC.
I gave her
It was
my
a
name,
good,
my
solid
address,
investment.
and my son's name.
It was brilliant.
I spoke with
Rebecca
the core of the
corrected.
story folded neatly in my pocket.
When Marcus applied for the
core was
penthouse,
safe.
the landlord, a
2
property
days after my
management
call, my
firm we
doorbell
hired,
rang.
contacted
Standing
him
on
with
my
a special
porch was a
offer.
man who looked like
They
he had
said
been
they were
carved
looking
from
for a
oak and left out
high-profile
in the
tenant,
rain.
like a tech
He was in his
CEO,
late
to add
50s
prestige
with a
to the
tired
building,
face,
and they
a
were willing to
rumpled
offer
suit,
him
and
an
eyes that
employee
had seen
incentive
too many
leave.
of the world's sad
His
stories.
rent is virtually
He held
zero.
up a badge.
He just pays the building
Detective
fee.
Harris,
He signed it
He said
bragging
his
for
voice a
weeks
low
that the
growl.
landlord was so impressed
I'm
with
here
him
about
that he
the
got the
report you
deal of a
filed.
lifetime.
I led
He
him
never
into the
read the
living
fine
room.
print. I
He
said,
moved with
no
a
one
heavy
ever does.
weariness.
His
Rebecca
gaze sweeping
confirmed.
over the room, the fine
Taking
print
in
of
the
course
family
states that
photos,
the incentive
the worn
lease is
armchair,
contingent on
the
his
quiet
continued
order of my
employment
life.
with MK
I could read the
Innovations,
thought in
Inc.
his mind as clearly
It also
as if he'd
states that the
spoken it
property
aloud.
management firm can terminate
Another
the lease
domestic
with
dispute.
72 hours notice.
An old man,
for any
a family
breach of
fight over
contract.
money, a
And the
misunderstanding
contract
blown out
defines
of
a breach as
proportion.
anything that might
He had
bring
already
the
filed
building's
my
name
story
into
away in a
disrepute.
mental cabinet labeled
So there it was.
routine.
The
My
whole house
job
of
was to
cards
prove
laid
him
out on
wrong.
Rebecca's expensive
Instead of
oak
offering
desk.
him coffee,
His
I
company,
gestured
his
to
car,
the dining room
his
table.
home.
I
Every
thought it would be
pillar of
best
his
if I
life
laid
was a carefully
everything out for you,
constructed
I said.
illusion,
He
designed,
followed me a
funded,
flicker
and
of
owned
surprise surprise
by
in
the
his
father
eyes.
he called a loser.
On the polished wood
He wasn't a
surface,
self-made
I had arranged
man.
the three
He
exhibits
was a
of my
trust
case.
fund baby who had
The
never
insurance
been told
policy
the
was
truth.
on the left.
Its
He has
pages
nothing.
filled with cold contractual
Rebecca,
language.
I
The
said the weight of
toxicology
the word
report from the
settling in
hospital
room.
was in the center
Everything
of
he
stark
thinks
medical
is his
confirmation
is
of the
actually
poison in my
mine.
veins. And on
Rebecca
the right,
leaned back,
the
her
small
work
glass
done for
vial
the
still
moment.
sealed in its
So,
evidence
Elias,
bag.
What is your
Harris
first
stopped
move?
at the table.
According
looked
to
at
the
the display,
protocol,
then at me.
the first step is always
The weariness
symbolic.
in his expression was
I thought
replaced
about
by a
the
sharp,
arrogant look
focused
on my
attention.
son's face,
The
the
way
way
he
he
gestured with his
rambling,
hand that wore a
emotional
watch
story.
I'd paid for driving
I
a
had
car
given
I
him a
owned
case
to go
file.
home to an apartment I
Mr.
provided.
Thompson.
The car, I
He said, his
without
tone
hesitation.
shifting from routine
We start
to
with the
respectful.
car. A winner
Walk me
shouldn't
through
have
this.
to ride the bus.
I did.
Rebecca made a note
For the
on
next
her
hour,
tablet,
I
her
recounted
fingers
the events
flying
of
across the
Christmas dinner.
screen.
I didn't
The
raise
car
my
it
voice.
is.
I didn't
She
cry.
confirmed her
I
voice,
presented
now
the
devoid of
facts
any
with the same
emotion
except
dispassion I
professional
would have
focus.
used to explain a
A tow truck
fraudulent
can be
expense
dispatched
report
to his
a corporate
residence by
board.
9:00
I pointed to the
a.m.
policy
Monday
motive.
morning,
I
citing
said I
the
pointed to the
termination of
vile
corporate
means. I
lease
pointed to
agreement.
the hospital
It will be
report
swift
method.
and entirely
I
legal.
explained my background as a
But
forensic
what's the larger
accountant.
strategy, Elias?
I told him that my entire career
the
was based
timeline?
on recognizing patterns
Do we
of
hit him with
deception,
everything at once?
and the patterns
car,
here were
the corporate
unmistakable.
accounts, the eviction notice.
Ethan's performative
We can have
wealth,
it all done
the
by noon
carefully
on Monday if
constructed
you want a
lies, the
full-scale
desperation
blitz.
I had sensed for months.
I shook my head slowly, looking
This
past
wasn't a
her
sudden
out at
act.
the skyline. I
It was
knew
the
so
logical
well.
endpoint of a long
No,
road of
I
financial
said,
recklessness.
That's not the way. That's
Harris listened
destruction.
without interruption.
That's revenge.
He picked
And
up
this
the
isn't
bagged
about
vial,
revenge.
examining it in the light.
What is it about?
He read every word of the
Then she
toxicology
asked
report,
gently.
his lips a
I
thin,
turned my
tight
gaze
line.
back to her, trying to
When I
find
was
the right
finished,
words.
he sat back
I
in the
thought
chair
about my life's
and looked
work
at me
about
for
the
a long
physics
time.
of structures and the
In my
integrity
line of work, he
foundations.
said,
Finally, 90%
when you need to bring
of
down a
cases are
building,
about emotion.
Rebecca,
Rage,
you don't just
jealousy,
set off
greed.
dynamite at the base.
They're messy, but
That's
this,
messy, unpredictable.
He gestured
It
to
sends
the
shrapnel
table.
everywhere and
This
hurts
is
innocent
clean.
people.
It's calculated.
It's an act of pure
You're
destruction.
right, Mr. Thompson.
This isn't
I
just
leaned
a
forward,
family
my hands
squabble.
clasped in front
This
of
is a
me.
business plan.
A true engineer, a builder,
That
does
was
it
the
differently.
moment
I knew he
You
believed
perform
me.
a controlled
The tide had
demolition.
turned.
You
I
dismantle
was no
it
longer
piece
a
by
potential
piece.
victim of
You
old
remove the
age and
fixtures
confusion.
first, the shiny
I was a
things that
credible
catch the
witness.
eye. He and
Then
his
you take
partner
out the
spent
windows,
the next
his
2
view of
hours
the world.
carefully collecting
Then you
the
carefully
evidence,
remove the
asking
floors
precise
one by
questions,
one
their
until
professionalism,
all that's
a
left is
comforting
the empty
balm on
frame
raw
and the bare
wound of
foundation.
situation.
I don't want to
Before he
destroy
left,
my
Harris
son,
gave me
Rebecca.
his card.
I want to dismantle
We're going to
the
look into
false
your
life
son's
he's living.
finances.
He
I want
said,
him to stand
if
on
what
the
you
cold,
suspect
hard
is true, the
foundation of
numbers won't
reality.
lie. And finally understand what it takes to build something
call
real
came
for
3
himself.
days later.
Rebecca
Samuel
listened,
Harris said,
her eyes never
dispensing with
leaving
the
mine.
formality of my last
She
name.
understood. She
We're
wasn't just my
digging, and
lawyer.
it's worse than you
She was
thought.
the daughter of a carpenter.
I sat down on my
She
hand,
knew the
tightening on
language of
receiver.
building
and breaking a
What did you
controlled
find
demolition.
the drug
She repeated a
amiodarone?
new
It's
understanding
not easy to
dawning
get
in her
without a
expression.
prescription, but it's not
It's
impossible.
legally cleaner too.
We started
Each
digging
action is
into
a separate,
online
justifiable
pharmacies, the kind
corporate
that
or
operate
property
in a legal
management
gray
decision.
area.
No
It took
single
some
action
time,
can
but
be
we
found a
construed as a
transaction from a
coordinated
European
personal
website
attack.
shipped to a
It's
PO
airtight.
box about 15 millimeters
Exactly,
from
I
your
said.
son's house. So we start with
purchase
the
was
car
made
5
Monday,
weeks
the
ago.
symbol of his status.
How did they pay for
We
it?
give him
I
a
asked,
day to
already
feel that
knowing the
loss,
answer.
to feel the
They
inconvenience.
wouldn't have been foolish
Then
enough
on
to use
Tuesday,
their
you
own
freeze
credit
the
card.
corporate accounts.
A prepaid
You cut
Visa
off his
card.
power.
Let him
Harris
feel what it's like
confirmed,
when the well runs
bought
dry.
with cash from a
And
quick
Victor
mart.
Manning's consulting
They thought they
payments
were
along
clever
with it.
that they were
Let the
leaving
winner
no feel the
trail,
pinch,
but
they
they
made
made
a
a mistake.
I
The
took a
PO
deep
box
breath
was
before
rented
delivering
under
the
a
final
false name,
instruction.
but the application
Then
was
on
filled out
Wednesday, when he's
online.
confused and powerless,
And the IP address
you
from
deliver
that
the eviction
application,
notice.
it traces
You take
back
away
to a
his
coffee
security
shop
one,
just
2
2 blocks
blocks
from
from
Ethan's office.
Let him feel each
We have him
wall
on
come
security
down.
footage from
Let
the
him
cafe
understand
laptop.
the value of
Open
each
at the
thing as he
exact
loses
time the
it.
application was
A
filed.
heavy silence
On
settled
top of
in
that,
the
the
room.
shipping records
This
combined
wasn't
with
a
the
plan
tracking
born
number
of
show the
anger.
package
It was
was delivered a
curriculum.
week before
A
Christmas.
harsh, painful
We have enough
curriculum.
Samuel.
Rebecca
We have more
simply
than enough.
nodded. The net
I
is
understand the
closed.
lesson plan.
A wave of
Elias.
something that wasn't
I'll prepare
quite
the necessary
relief washed
documents
over me.
immediately. It was a grim,
I
hollow
stood up my old
finality.
bones aching,
The
with
last
weariness
ember of
that had
hope,
nothing
the
to do
father's
with age.
desperate,
I
irrational
had made
wish
the decision
that there was
Now
some
I
other
just had to live
explanation
with
was
it.
finally extinguished.
Thank you,
There was
Rebecca.
only the cold, hard
I
ash
walked
of
to the
truth.
door, then paused with
So
my
you'll
hand on
arrest
the
them
handle.
now. Warrants are
Let
being
it
drawn
begin.
up as we
I
speak.
said, my voice barely a
Harris said,
whisper.
we can pick them
Let
up
the
this
lesson
evening.
commence. This was
The
it.
rest of that week was perhaps
the
the
moment
quietest
of
of my
justice,
life.
but a different thought.
After
a
leaving
different
Rebecca's
plan had been
office,
taking
I
shape
felt
in
a
my mind for
strange
days.
sense of peace
It
settle
wasn't
over
enough
me.
for them to be caught.
The
by
decision
police.
had been made.
That was
The
an
plan
external
was in
force,
motion.
something that happened.
There was
to
nothing
them.
left to do but wait
I
for
wanted
the
them
gears
to
to
understand
turn.
the full scope of
I
their
spent
actions,
Friday and Saturday
the
in my
totality
garden.
of what they had
My
thrown
rose
away.
bushes needed
They
pruning,
needed
a
to see
task
the
I
checkmate
usually
not
enjoyed,
just
but
be swept from
now
the
took
board by
on
a
with a new
stranger's
solemn
hand.
purpose.
Detective,
My hands calloused
I
from a
said, my voice
lifetime of
steady.
work, moved
I
with
have a
practiced
request.
precision.
Can you give me 24
Snip.
hours?
A dead branch
Hold
fell
off
away.
on the arrest until tomorrow
Snip.
afternoon.
An
There
overgrown
was a
shoot
pause
that
on
was
the other
taking
end of the
nutrients
line.
from the main stem.
Samuel,
I thought about
this
what I was
is
doing.
a serious felony. Melanie, we have
Gardening is
what
an
we need.
exercise in
Why
ruthless
wait?
compassion.
Because
You can't
there
be
is one
sentimental
last
about the
move I
parts
need
of
to
a
make.
plant that are
I
weak
said,
or diseased.
It's not about your case.
If you let
it's
them
about
grow,
mine.
they will
I
eventually
need
poison
them
the
to
whole
understand
bush.
what they've done.
You have
not
to cut
just
them
to
back
me, but to
sometimes almost to the
themselves.
stalk
Please,
to give the
detective.
plant a chance to grow back
One
stronger,
day, I could
healthier.
hear him sigh.
You do it not out
A
of
sound of
anger, but out of a
exasperation mixed
desire
with
for
a
the plant
reluctant
to reach its
respect.
full potential.
All right,
My
Samuel,
son was a
against my better
magnificent plant
judgment,
that
you
had
have
become
until
overgrown
3
with
p.m.
the weeds of
tomorrow.
entitlement
But
and
then it's
arrogance.
over.
I was
As
just
soon
the
as I hung
gardener
up with
doing the
Harris, I
hard,
called my
necessary
lawyer.
work.
Robert,
On Saturday
It's
afternoon,
time.
my phone buzzed on the
An hour
small
later,
wooden
Robert
bench
made a
beside
call to
me.
Ethan's
I
attorney.
picked it up. His approach was a
Marcus's
work of
name
art, a
glowed on the
masterpiece
screen.
of misdirection.
A week ago, my heart
spoke
would have
of my
leaped.
age, my
I
fragile
would have answered
health,
immediately,
the terrible
ready to
stress
absorb
this
whatever casual
misunderstanding was
disrespect
putting on
he
my
threw
heart.
my way just
He
to hear
painted
his
a picture
voice.
of a lonely old father.
Now I simply
perhaps
looked at his
regretting his
name.
rash accusations.
I watched it
horrified
flash
at the
again
thought of
and
his
again,
only
a
son being
desperate
involved
digital
in a police
cry.
investigation.
Then I placed the phone
He
face
suggested
down
a
on the
meeting, a
bench and
final
went back to
attempt
my
at
roses.
reconciliation,
A
an hour
chance to
later
talk
at things
buzzed
over
again.
and find a peaceful
This time it was
resolution
Clara.
away from the harsh
I didn't
glare
even
of the
bother
law.
to look.
As
Her
Robert
silence
predicted,
at the dinner
they took
table
the bait.
had been her answer.
Their lawyer called
My
back within
silence
the
was
hour.
now mine.
Ethan and Sophia were, of
That
course,
evening, I
deeply
sat
hurt
in
by
my
the
worn leather
accusations.
armchair,
But
a
they were
place I had
willing to
spent
meet.
countless
They
hours
loved their
reading.
father, and they were willing
I
to
wasn't
clear
reading
their
a
names
thriller
and mend this
or a
painful
mystery.
family rift.
I was rereading
They
a
agreed to
biography
come to
of
Robert's
Abraham
office
Lincoln
the next day at noon.
Not the general,
They thought they were
but the
walking
president,
into
a man who was
negotiation.
quiet, underestimated.
They believed they
and
were coming
constantly
to manage
battling
the corruption of
confused
those
old
around him,
man
to
I
emotionally
came across a
manipulate
passage
him
about
into
his
retracting his
steadfastness.
story.
His ability
They
to
had no
absorb
idea they
blows
were
and
walking into
criticism
their own
without
execution,
flinching all,
while focusing on
the
the
next
larger
day I sat in the
strategic
conference
goal.
room at Robert's
He wasn't
law firm.
flashy. He was
It was a
solid.
room
He
designed
dealt
to
not in
communicate
opinions,
power
but in
and
outcomes.
permanence.
The
I
walls
closed
were
the book and
paneled
thought
with
about the
dark
word
mahogany
Marcus had
lined
used
with
loser.
shelves of leather-bound law
He saw my
books
quiet
that
life,
smelled of dust
my
and
modest
authority.
home, my
The table
old
was a
car,
single massive piece
and he saw
of
a man
polished
who had
wood
lost
so heavy
at the game
it
of
felt
life.
like part of the building's
He never saw the
foundation.
foundations.
This room was a
He
world
never
away
understood
from
that
the
the
fragile,
loudest
glittering
person in the
facade
room
of my
is
son's
often
life.
the weakest.
This room was about consequences.
Clara and Victor were playing
sat
a game
far
of
at the far end
checkers,
of the
making
table with
loud,
Robert to
obvious
my right.
moves.
I
They never
nothing.
realized I was
My
playing
role in
chess
this was to
quietly,
be a
positioning
silent,
my
unmovable
pieces
presence
for a checkmate that was
Ethan
decided
and
10
Sophia
moves ago.
arrived precisely at noon.
Sunday was even
They were
quieter.
dressed for their roles.
I attended
Ethan
church
wore a
the
tailored
same one I'd
suit,
been
his
going to
expression
for
a careful
40
blend
years.
of concern.
I listened to
and
the sermon
resolve.
on accountability and
Sophia
consequence.
wore a simple,
I felt a
elegant
sense
dress,
of
her
clarity,
face a mask
not
of
guilt.
sorrowful beauty.
I was holding my
They looked
son
like the
accountable.
victims, a
I
devoted
was delivering the
couple forced to
consequences
endure an
he had earned.
unspeakable family tragedy.
After the service, I spent the
nodded
afternoon in
gravely
my
at me.
workshop, sanding
Dad,
down a piece of old oak.
Ethan said his
the
voice
rhythmic
thick
motion
with fake
calming my
emotion.
soul.
The
Thank
phone
you for
remained on
doing
the
this.
kitchen counter silent.
I know
now.
we can sort
They had
this
likely
out.
given up, assuming I was
They sat down
sulking.
opposite
They had no
us.
idea.
Their lawyer,
As
a
dusk
slick
fell,
man in
I
a
sat
suit
on my
that was
back
too
porch
expensive,
watching the sun
began
dip
with a
below
speech
the
about the
horizon,
importance of
painting
family
the Chicago
and the
sky
potential
in
for
shades of
misunderstandings
orange
in
and purple.
times of stress.
The air grew cool.
I let the
The
words
weekend
wash
was
over
over.
me.
My
I looked at
final
my son
quiet weekend
and the
before
woman
the
he had
storm.
married, and
I
I
thought
felt
of the
nothing,
name Rebecca,
no anger,
and I had given
no
the plan the
sadness,
Sunset Protocol.
just the quiet final
it was
closing
fitting
of a door.
The sun was setting on my son's life.
When their
as he
lawyer
knew
had
it,
finished,
and tomorrow morning
Robert
with the
leaned
dawn,
forward,
placing
placing
a
a single
necessary
thick folder
education
with a blue
would
cover
begin.
on the table. It
I
landed
felt no
with a
joy,
soft,
only a
definitive
profound,
thud.
heavy certainty.
Thank you
The
for
lesson
coming.
was coming.
Robert began
I
his
spent my
voice
weekend in
calm
quiet
and even.
contemplation.
As
My
you know,
son, as
Samuel
I
has
would
been
later
through a great
piece
deal.
together from a series of
This
frantic
situation has forced
voicemails
him to
and
do a
tearful
lot of
confessions
thinking, not
spent
just
his
about the
in a
present,
cacophony
but about
of
the future.
self-congratulation. Ethan and Sophia exchanged
While I was
a
pruning
quick,
my
confident
roses,
glance.
he was on the
This
phone
was
with
it.
one of his
The old
friends
man was
laughing
cracking.
as he drove his Audi
But Robert
down
didn't
the
mention the
highway,
police. He
the
didn't
city
mention the
skyline
hospital
blurring
or the
past his
vial or the
window.
insurance policy.
Dude, you should
His
have
voice
seen
remained
his
placid.
face. Marcus
It
had
all
said,
started
his
about
voice
6
booming
months
through
ago,
the
actually.
car's Bluetooth
Ethan, you may
speakers.
remember you came to
I
your
finally
father
just
to
told
ask
him
for
the
a
truth.
significant loan.
Called him a loser right to his face.
$40,000.
Yeah, he just got up and walked out.
Ethan shifted
Total
in his
drama
chair,
queen.
a flicker
What's
of
he gonna
annoyance
do?
crossing his face.
You know he'll get over it.
I don't see what that
He
has
always
to do
does.
with anything.
He'll call
That
in
was
a
a
week
private
acting
family
like
matter.
nothing happened.
Of course,
He saw my lifetime
Robert
of
said
patience
smoothly.
not as a gift,
But
as
for
a
Samuel,
weakness.
it was a moment
He
of
saw my
clarity.
silence not as
It
a
made him
warning,
realize
but
that
as
he needed
surrender.
to think seriously about his estate.
That evening,
about
while I
how
was
best to
reading about
protect his
President
legacy
Lincoln,
for the
Marcus and
future.
Sophia
He
were in their
became
penthouse
concerned about
scrolling through a
financial
website for
volatility,
luxury
about
watches on
ensuring his
Sophia's
life's
tablet.
work would be managed
She had pointed to a
responsibly.
gold one with a diamond
Robert
bezel.
let the silence hang in the air for a
Should I
moment
get it,
before he
babe?
delivered the final
It's a little
devastating
extravagant.
blow. However,
Marcus,
he said, tapping a single
I was
paragraph
told
on the
had
page with
scoffed.
his finger.
Of course you should.
Given
We
his
deserve
concerns,
it,
your
especially
father
after the way my
insisted on
dad
adding
acted
a very
at dinner.
specific and
Honestly,
very
I
binding
think we need to
special
treat
clause
ourselves after that
that embarrassment.
Robert let his words hang
In his
the
mind,
silent
he was
room,
the victim.
phrase, special
My
clause
quiet
echoing
departure
in the
was an
space
act of
between
aggression
us.
against him, a social
I
faux
watched my
pas
son's
that
face.
required retail therapy to
The
overcome.
confusion was still there.
He had no
but now it
capacity
was
to see his
curdling
own
into
cruelty.
suspicion.
His world was
Sophia
a mirror,
glanced at their
and all
lawyer,
it
a
showed was
silent
his own
question in her
reflection.
eyes.
But
But
the
the
man
man
called
looked as
Victor
bewildered
seeking
as they
praise
did.
for his brave
They
performance.
were all playing a game they didn't know
Victor,
the rules
ever
to.
the opportunist,
They
had
were about
supplied
to
it in
learn.
abundance.
Robert
You did the
cleared
right
his
thing,
throat,
Marcus,
not for
the man
effect,
had said, his
but
voice
with the
smooth
quiet
as oil.
deliberation of a man.
Sometimes you have to set firm boundaries with people from a different generation,
down at the
people who
document.
don't understand the
The clause
mindset
is
of a
under
winner.
Article 4, Section
Thanks, Victor.
B. He said
Marcus
his
had
voice
replied,
a
his voice
dispassionate
full of a
legal
warmth
drone.
he hadn't used
It
with
reads
me
as
in
follows.
years. It's just good
Should
to
the
finally have a
primary
beneficiary,
role model
Ethan
to look
Thompson,
up to,
be convicted
a real
of any
role
state,
model,
a
a
man
federal
whose entire
felony offense,
consulting business
this trust
consisted
shall
of a
be
single
immediately
inflated
dissolved.
contract with a
He
company
paused.
I owned.
Letting the
The
first part
irony
of the
was a
trap
bitter pill.
snap shut.
Marcus had
Ethan's
finished that
lawyer
weekend
blinked.
looking out the vast
A
window of
felony
his
clause
apartment.
that's highly
The city
unusual,
lights
but not
spread out
unheard
beneath
of.
him like a carpet
Ethan
of
let out a
jewels.
tense, nervous
He was on
laugh.
top of the world he
A
believed he
felony?
had built.
What are
He
you
likely
talking
thought
about?
of
me, the old man in his
I'm not a
dusty
criminal.
house, and felt a pang
looked
of
at me
what
a
he
desperate
probably
plea
mistook
for
reason
pity.
in his eyes. He probably thought,
Dad, this
he'll
is
come
insane.
around. He has to.
What
He's
is
got
this
nothing
all
else.
about?
But
I
he was
remained
wrong.
silent.
My gaze
I
was
did have
steady.
something else.
I was
I
simply
had a
the
plan, and the
accountant here
time
to
for
watch the
waiting
final
was over.
numbers being tallied.
It was Sunday night,
Robert
10
didn't
p.m.
flinch.
The weekend was
He
done.
leaned back in his
My
leather
house was
chair,
dark,
the picture
except
of
for the
calm
single lamp
authority.
that cast a warm
On
glow
the
on
contrary,
the oak desk in
Ethan,
my
he
study.
said, his voice soft
The
but
quiet in the house
unyielding.
was different now.
The trust
It was
is
no longer the
irrevocable.
calm after a decision.
It was signed
but
and
the
witnessed
tense
6
electric
months ago.
silence before
We
a
have a
storm.
notarized affidavit.
The fuse
from
had
your
been lit
father's
on
physician
Friday,
dated
and
the
it had
same
been
day,
burning
certifying
slowly,
that he was
silently
of
all
sound
weekend.
mind and body.
Now it
and
was
under no
nearing the
duress.
powder keg. We also
I
have a
wasn't
video
pacing.
recording of the
I
entire
was
signing
sitting in my
process.
leather armchair.
It is,
the
I
biography
assure
of
you,
Lincoln resting
ironclad.
in my lap. My
The fight
eyes
drained
closed.
out of Ethan's face,
I was
replaced
listening,
by the
waiting.
hollow gray look of utter defeat.
At precisely
He
10:01
sank
p.m.,
back into his chair.
a soft chime
He
echoed
finally
from my old
understood.
HP computer.
They both did.
An email notification.
I watched them as the
I
full,
didn't rush.
devastating weight of
I
my
took a
trap
deep breath,
settled
placed
upon
my
them.
book carefully
Their
on the
plan
side
had been
table,
to commit
and
the
rose
perfect
from my
crime
chair
to poison me in a way
I walked
that
to the
mimicked
desk,
a natural
the
heart
wooden
attack,
floorboards
to collect
creaking
clean
softly under my weight.
$1.5 million
The screen
from
was
the
bright in
insurance
the dark
company,
room,
and then
a
to
single
inherit
new
the remaining
email sat in
$6
my
million
inbox.
upon my tragic
The
but
sender
not
was
unexpected
Rebecca
death.
Klein.
The subject line was simply
$7.5 million
update.
prize.
I moved the mouse, but they
clicked
had
it
made
open.
one fatal miscalculation.
The body of the email was stark
They
white,
had
containing only
underestimated
6
me.
words standing
They saw
alone
me
in
as
the
an
center
old
of the
man, a
screen, like
resource to be
military
managed,
command.
and eventually
I leaned in
liquidated.
the reflection of the
They never
glowing
saw me
text,
as the man
visible
who had
in my
spent
glasses.
40 years thinking 3
The
steps
first
ahead of
domino has
smarter
been
criminals
pushed.
than them. Monday morning
The
dawned
trap wasn't
bright
the police
and
obnoxious
investigation.
sunlight streaming
The trap
through
wasn't
the
the
floor to
vial of
ceiling
poison.
windows of the penthouse.
The true trap
and
was this
glinting off the
document
polished
signed
chrome
and
of their
sealed
espresso
6
machine.
months ago.
For
They had been
Marcus, the
caught in
world
it the
felt
moment
perfect.
they decided to
The
act.
weekend had been
Their
a
fatal
triumph.
flaw was their
He had
greed.
finally put his father in
They
his
could have
place,
simply
asserting
waited,
his own
but they were
status as the
impatient.
family's new alpha.
The insurance fraud was their
He felt
undoing.
powerful of feeling
Even if by
amplified
some
by the
miracle they
expensive
managed
Italian
to beat
suit
the
he was
attempted
putting
murder
on.
charge.
And the sleek black
Insurance
Audi
fraud
A8
for a
that
sum
was
of
waiting for him in the
$1.5
reserved
million
parking
is a
spot in the
serious
garage
federal
below.
felony. Sophia
The
was
moment a
humming
jury
as she applied
convicted
her
them
makeup.
of that, the clause
A
would
small,
be triggered.
satisfied
The
smile
$6
on
million
her face.
inheritance would
Are
vanish.
you sure you don't want me to
They hadn't
drive
been
you
playing
today,
for
honey?
$7.5
She asked,
million
looking at his
prize.
reflection in the
They
mirror.
had been gambling with
We
$6
could take the
million
Lexus.
they were already set to inherit.
I have that spa
All
appointment
for the chance
at
to get
11
an
Tuesday.
extra $1.5 million.
Marcus
a
chuckled,
little bit
adjusting
sooner,
his tie.
and they had lost everything.
I've got a lunch meeting.
They had
with
spent
some new
months
potential
planning
clients.
a crime, not
I need to
realizing
roll
that
up in
their
the
punishment
AA.
had been
You know how
already
it is.
written into law.
Image is everything.
My law waiting for them to walk.
He leaned
right
in and
into
kissed her on the cheek.
The scent
Sophia
of her
began to
expensive
sob.
perfume filling
Not
his
loud
senses.
theatrical sobs.
Besides,
Besides, silent shoulder
he added his
shaking
voice
sobs
dropping
of
to a
someone whose entire
conspiratorial
world
whisper.
has just been reduced to dust.
I think we've earned the right
Ethan
to show
just
off
stared
a
at
little.
me, his
We're
mouth
winners,
slightly
remember?
open, his eyes
She
vacant.
giggled and swatted
The
him
hatred was
playfully.
gone.
Go on, get
The
out of here,
anger
you big
was
shot.
gone. There was nothing
Feeling
left
on
but
top
the
of the
vast,
world.
empty space of his own
Marcus
ruin.
grabbed his leather
saw it all
briefcase
now.
and headed for the
He
private
saw the
elevator
checkmate.
that went directly
At that
to the
exact
residence
moment,
garage.
there was a sharp,
The ride
authoritative
down was
knock on the
smooth
conference
and
room
silent.
door.
The doors
Robert looked at
opened
me.
to a pristine,
I gave a
well-lit
slight
space.
nod.
And there it was,
Come in,
his car.
Robert called out.
It wasn't just a car.
The door opened, and
It
Detective
wasn't a
Harris
mode of
stepped
transportation.
inside. He was
It was
flanked
a
by two
statement.
uniformed police
Long,
officers.
low, and gleaming
The air
under the
of
fluorescent
quiet legal
lights.
devastation
It was the
instantly
physical
replaced
embodiment
by the
of his
stark,
success.
unavoidable
He
reality
clicked
of
the
the state.
fob, and the car
Harris's
chirped
tired
its
eyes
angel eye
found Ethan and
headlights flashing a
Sophia.
welcome.
He held up
But
his
as he
badge,
walked toward
a
it,
formality
he
that
noticed
was
something
almost
was wrong.
absurd in its
A
redundancy.
large Grimo-looking
Ethan
tow truck
Thompson
was parked
Harris
directly
said his
behind his
voice,
Audi, leaving no room for
Its
argument.
yellow
hazard lights flashing
Sophia
rhythmically,
Thompson.
casting an ugly
You
pulsating
are under
glow
arrest
on the
for
polished
conspiracy
concrete
to
floor.
commit murder and for
A man in
insurance
greasy
fraud.
blue overalls
The
was
unformed
kneeling by
officers
his rear
moved forward.
tire. I heard the
Marcus's
sharp
good mood
metallic click of
evaporated
handcuffs
instantly,
being fastened
replaced by a
around
surge of
Sophia's wrist.
irritation.
She didn't resist.
He
She was
barked
utterly
his
broken,
voice
echoing in the garage.
The second officer
What the
approached
hell do you think
think
Ethan,
you're
who
doing?
remained seated,
This is a
staring into
private
nothing.
garage. You can't
Sir,
park
please
here.
stand up and put
The
your
man
hands
in
behind your
overalls
back.
stood up slowly, wiping
Sir,
his
the
hands on a
officer
rag.
repeated.
He was big
Ethan
with a
didn't
weathered
seem to
face
hear
and a
him.
completely
He was
neutral
looking
expression.
at me, his eyes
He didn't look
finally
impressed.
focusing.
He didn't look
He wasn't
intimidated.
seeing a
He just
father
looked
or a
tired.
victim. He was seeing
You
the
Marcus
architect
Harrington?
of his demise.
He asked his voice.
He had thought he was
growly,
playing a game of
monotone.
chess, but he had been
I am
pawn
Marcus
on my board
Snapped.
all along.
And you're
As
about
they
to get
led
your
him
rust
away,
bucket towed
his
if you don't
hands
move it
cuffed
in the
behind
next
his
10
back.
seconds.
He was
You're
silent.
blocking my car.
The fight was over.
The man didn't move.
The performance was
Instead,
done.
he simply gestured
The
with
play
his
had
thumb
ended.
toward the back of the
All
Audi.
that was left was the quiet
No,
of the
sir.
empty room.
I'm not blocking
the
your
blue
car.
folder
I'm
still
here to
sitting on the
repossess it.
table, and the final
The words
balanced
didn't
entry
register
in
at
the ledger
first.
of my life.
They were so absurd,
felt
so
no
out of
victory,
place in
no
his
joy,
perfect world,
just
that
his
his
brain
brain
refused
refused
to
to
process
piece
them.
of a long and
He actually
painful
laughed,
calculation,
a short
finally coming to
incredulous
zero.
bark.
The wheels of
Repossess it.
justice turned
You must
slowly.
be joking, but
This
they
car is
grind
paid for. It's a
exceedingly
corporate
fine.
lease. You've obviously
6
got the
months
wrong
after
car,
that
pal.
terrible Christmas dinner,
The driver
the
just
legal
sighed
proceedings
as if
came
he'd
to a
had this
quiet
exact
end.
conversation
The
a
evidence was
thousand times.
overwhelming. The digital
He
and
pulled a
chemical
clipboard from the
trails
cab
leading
of
to
his
Ethan
truck
and
and held it
Sophia
out.
as surely as a map.
Work order says
The jury
Black
found
Audi
him guilty
A8
on all
license
counts.
plate 8 kilo. The sentences were long.
Victor 391
There was no
belongs to a
dramatic
Mr.
courtroom
Marcus
confession,
Harrington.
no tearful apology.
That you,
There was only the dull
Marcus's face
bureaucratic
flushed with
finality
anger
of a gavel. This was
falling on
humiliating.
wood.
Yes, that's me.
A week later,
But
Robert called
there's
me.
been a mistake.
His voice
A
was
stupid
calm,
mistake.
businesslike.
Who
It's
sent
done,
you
Samuel, he
MK
said.
Innovations
The transfer is
Inc.
complete.
Because I own that
The entire
company,
$6
and I
million
can
from the
assure
trust
you
has
we
been
haven't
received
missed a
by the
payment.
National Institute
The
for
driver
Fraud
pointed a
Victims.
greasy finger to
The
a
books were
line on the
balanced.
work order. The final
The
entry
order
had been
is
made.
not from
MK
The
Innovations,
case was
sir.
closed.
It's from the title
I thanked
holder,
him
a
and hung
company
up the
called
phone.
Harrington
I
Investments.
was sitting in my
LLC.
armchair, the one my
Marcus
wife always
stared at the
used
name.
to say I would become
Harrington
a permanent
Investments.
part of. It meant nothing
The
to him.
afternoon sun
A
streamed
surge
through
of
the
relief
window,
washed over him,
illuminating the
followed
dust
by
motes
renewed
dancing
fury.
in the still air.
See, I told you.
I should have
I've never
felt
heard of
something.
that company.
Triumph,
It's
perhaps,
clerical
or
error.
the bitter satisfaction
Now get your
of
truck out of here
revenge,
before I
but
call
felt
security
neither.
and have you arrested for
Instead,
trespassing.
what settled over me was
The driver
a
just
profound
shook his
and
head.
unexpected sense
A flicker of
peace.
something like pity in his
It was
eyes.
the quiet that comes
Sir,
after a long
I've
and
got a
violent
legally
storm
executed
when the wind dies
repossession
down,
order,
and
if
you
you have a
finally
problem
hear
with
the
it, you
sound
need to
of
call
your
the
own
leasing
breathing
company.
again.
This
He
was
turned his
never
back on
about
Marcus
revenge.
and started
Revenge
attaching
is a
a heavy
fire,
chain to the
a hot,
undercarriage of the
consuming
Audi.
rage that
The sound
destroys
of metal
everything in its
clanking
path,
against metal was
including
like
the
the person
person
who
who
wields
wields
it.
Hey,
what I had done
get your
was
hands
the
off my
opposite of
car.
fire.
Marcus
It was
shouted,
ice. His voice
It was a
cracking with
cold,
rage.
deliberate, and
He
necessary
pulled out his phone, his
calculation.
hand shaking so
It was
much
the
he could
last
barely
audit
unlock
of my
it.
life.
Sophia was going to be
examined a
late
set
for
of
her spa
accounts
day.
that were deeply
He was going to be
criminally
late for his
unbalanced,
meeting.
and I had simply
was
put
a
things back
disaster.
in order. Ordinal,
After
the
an
German word for it.
excruciatingly long series
Not
of
just
automated
order,
menus,
but a state of
a
rightness
calm
of things
female
being
voice
in their
finally
proper
answered.
place. I
Elite
thought of Ethan.
Executive Leasing.
I did not
This
think
is
of the
Sarah
man in the
speaking.
courtroom.
How
with
can
the
I help
hollow
you?
eyes and the expensive
My
suit.
name is Marcus
I
Harrington.
thought of the little boy
he
who
said
used to
through
fall
gritted
asleep
teeth.
on my lap.
You have made a
His small
massive
hand
mistake.
curled around
You
my
sent a
finger.
tow truck to
I thought of
repossess
the
my
teenager
car,
I taught
a
how to
Audi
drive his
A8.
knuckles
I
white
need
with
you to
fear
call
and
it off
excitement
right
on the steering
now.
wheel of my old Honda.
There was a moment of
Where did that
silence
boy
filled
go?
only by the sound of furious
When did
typing.
the rot set in?
I see your
And
account,
in the
Mr.
quiet
Harrington.
of my home,
Sarah said, her voice
I had to
perfectly
face a
polite and
difficult truth.
completely unhelpful.
perhaps I had been so busy
Yes, the Audi
balancing
A8.
the ledgers of other
It looks like the
people's lives
repossession order
that
was
I had
issued
failed
this
to
morning
uncover
at
the growing
8:05
deficit
a.m.
in my own
I know it
son's
was
soul.
issued. I'm telling
Perhaps
you
in
it's a
my own
mistake.
quiet, reserved
Marcus was
way,
practically
I had taught
shouting
him
into
that
the
value
phone.
was something that
The tow
could be
truck driver
quantified,
was now
measured in
lowering the
dollars
lift,
and
preparing to
cents,
hoist the front
rather than in
wheels of his
character
beautiful
and
car off
integrity.
the ground.
The guilt was a quiet,
I'm not seeing any
familiar
mistake in the
ache,
system.
but I had not put the
Sir
poison
Sarah
in his
continued,
hand.
her
I had
tone
not signed his
unchanging.
name on that insurance
The lease
policy.
agreement was terminated by
I
the
could
owner
not
of the
save my
vehicle,
son from the
Harrington
man he had
Investments
chosen to
LLC.
become.
My
I've never heard of
relationship with him, the
Harrington
one I
Investments,
had
he
cherished
yelled.
and mourned
The
for
lease is
years
through my
was
company,
gone.
MK
I
Innovations,
had to
Inc.
accept that. But
I
what I see that
considered what I
MK
did do
Innovations
was
Inc.
prevent
was
him
the
from
authorized
spiraling
user,
further
sir,
into a
she said
darkness
calmly, from which there was no
But
return.
Harrington
My
Investments
actions had not been to
LLC
protect
is the
just
legal
myself.
owner and lesser
They
of
were
the
to protect
vehicle.
him from becoming
As
a
the
murderer.
owner, they have the right to
In a
terminate the
strange,
lease
sad
at any
way,
time.
it was the
Section
last
4,
act of the
paragraph
father.
B of your
I
agreement.
had not saved the
We are
man,
simply the
but
administrators.
perhaps I had saved
His
what was
mind
left
was
of his
reeling.
soul.
It made no
The
sense.
sun began to set.
He felt a
painting
wave
the
of walls
walls
of my living room
This
in
is
hues
insane.
of orange and gold.
Put me through to someone
For
at
the first
Harrington
time in a
Investments.
long
Then I'll
time,
clear
the
this
house
up.
didn't feel empty.
I'm sorry,
It
sir.
felt
Sarah
still.
said.
It felt like
for the
my
first
own.
time he detected
My
a
life
note of
was no longer
finality in her
defined
voice.
by the ghost of my
We don't have a
son's
public contact number
expectations
for
or
that
the
entity.
weight of his betrayals.
All communications are
It
handled
was a
through
clean
their
slate
legal
and open
representative.
ledger.
We have
I walked
fulfilled
over
our
to my
legal
old wooden
obligation by
desk,
acting
the
on
one I
our
had used
request.
for 40 years.
This matter is now
I
closed
opened
on
the
our
top
end.
drawer and took out a new checkbook.
Closed. One tied
not
to my
closed.
personal accounts.
The front
The
wheels
money
of
money
of
I
the
had set
Audi were
aside
now
for
off
my
the
own
ground.
retirement, separate
The car,
from the
his
trust.
symbol of power and
The funds were
success, was
modest
hanging
compared
there,
to the fortune I had
helpless and
just given away.
But they
Is
were
there
more
anything
than
else I
enough.
can help you with today,
They were mine.
Mr. Harrington?
I opened
Sarah
the checkbook
asked,
as if she were
the clean,
asking
empty
if he
lines
wanted
of the
fries
first
with
check
his
looked
order.
like a promise.
He was speechless.
For so long,
The
money had been a
injustice
tool
of it
for
all
my
choked
son.
him, a weapon for
He
my
heard a
family.
click, and the line went
It
dead.
had been a source of strife.
She had
created
hung
and
up on him.
ultimately a motive.
He looked
for
up from
murder.
his phone, his
but it was
face a
just
mask
that
of
a tool
disbelief
and a tool
and
could be
impotent
used to
rage.
build, as
The
well
tow truck
as
driver
break.
was in his cab, starting the
My
engine.
hand was steady.
The powerful
as I
diesel
picked up a
engine
pen.
roared to life, drowning
I didn't
out
write a check
all
to a
other
large,
sound.
faceless charity.
He was left standing
Thought
there
for a
in his
moment,
thousand
and then I wrote
suit
out the
and
name
his
of a
shiny
small local
Italian
community
shoes,
college.
utterly powerless.
I made
He
the
watched
check out
as
for
the
an
truck
amount that would
slowly,
fund a full
carefully pulled his
scholarship
car
for
out
one
of the
student.
parking spot.
Someone who wanted
He
to
watched
study
it being
accounting,
dragged backwards
someone who
up the
wanted to
ramp,
learn the
its
language
rear
of
wheels
numbers.
scraping meekly
In the memo
against
line,
the
I wrote
concrete.
in the name of
He
integrity.
watched as the
I
symbol of
signed
his
my
entire
name,
identity
Samuel
was hauled
Thompson.
out of his private
The signature
garage
was firm
and
clear.
into the harsh light of
It was
day,
the signature of a
disappearing from
man
his
who
life
knew his
forever.
own worth.
A
The yellow
worth that
lights
had
flashed
nothing to
one
do with
last
the
time
balance
before
in
the
his
truck
bank
turned the
account.
corner, and then there
As I
was
tore the
only
check from the
silence.
book, I
He was
realized
left
I
alone in the
wasn't
garage
mourning
with
a
an
lost
empty parking
fortune or a
space
broken
and the
family.
faint smell of diesel
I was
fumes.
investing in a future,
The first
a
pillar of
future
his
where
world had
order
just
and
been
honesty
violently
still
ripped away.
mattered.
I had learned
If the
that
loss of
true
his car on
justice
Monday
isn't
was
about
the
the
first
first tremor. The main
it's about
earthquake was
restoration.
scheduled for
It's
Tuesday
about
morning.
balancing the books in a
The
way
second
that
domino
creates
was
a better
not about
world,
status.
however small
It
the
was
entry
about
may
power.
be.
It was
And
about
in the
money.
quiet of my home, as
I spent my
twilight
morning
settled
peacefully
outside,
reading a book on my
I
porch,
understood that my
but
story
I knew
was
that
not
across
an
town
ending.
my
It
son's
was a
world
new
was
beginning,
being
a
systematically
new ledger
dismantled
with a new purpose.
Starting
And for
with
the
the
first
most
time
public
in a very long
humiliations,
time,
I
Marcus
felt
arrived
truly
at the
peacefully
gleaming glass
solvent.
tower that housed his
This
office
story
nearly
teaches
an
us
hour
that
late.
true
strength is
He was
rarely
flustered
loud.
and furious,
It
having
is
been
the
forced to
quiet,
take a
calculated
$75
resolve of
Uber
a
across
person who
town
has been
during rush hour.
underestimated.
He was determined to
shows that
project
wisdom,
an air
when
of
paired
calm
with
control
patience,
to show
is a
his
more
employees
powerful
that
weapon
nothing
than
was
greed.
wrong.
The
His
greatest
first stop
justice
was the
is not
artisan
found
coffee
in
shop
fiery
in the
revenge,
lobby
but
of
in the
his
calm,
building,
deliberate
a
act
place
of
where he was a
restoring order
well-known
and protecting
regular.
one's own dignity.
He always made a show of it.
We learned that
buying
even
coffee
after
and
the
pastries
deepest
for his
betrayal,
executive
it is
team,
possible to
a
find a
king
new purpose
dispensing
transforming
favors to his
pain
court.
into a force for
He
good.
strode to the
It's a
counter,
profound
cutting
reminder
in front of
that
the
a
line
person's
with a
true
dismissive
worth
wave.
is measured by their
Morning,
integrity,
Chloe,
not their
he
inheritance.
said to the young barista.
What did you think
The
of
usual
Samuel's
for the
ultimate
team: 6
plan?
large lattes, 4
Let us know in the
cappuccinos, and a
comments
box
below.
of your best pastry.